I thought everyone should have a chance to be heard. If I'm playing 18th clarinet chair, um, I want to be heard
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm going to go join soccer team or something. And there are ways to let them be heard. Give the whole clarinet section a like a soli moment.
Right.
Um, give everybody who's not optional something where they feel they're an integral part of everything.
Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited about our next guest. I have been a huge fan of Anne McGinty for quite a while, from the earliest stages in the classroom as a band director, using her music. I really loved what she wrote for various ensembles at different levels. It always sounded great, had a lot of great substance to it, just beautiful music. And I am super excited to kind of talk to her, learn a little bit more about her, what she's been doing, and I'm sure you guys are too. Anne, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, a lot of us know you from the music that we've played with our wind bands, or, now you're writing it for a lot of smaller chamber ensembles and solo repertoire. Before we get into some of that stuff, tell us about maybe your journey in music. How did you kind of pursue this?
Oh gosh, let's go back all the way where I was a flute player. And I went to Ohio State for a year and dropped out because I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. And I really didn't think I wanted to be there. And I walked right into a professional playing job 2 years later,
Wow.
auditioned for Tucson Symphony. They had a new conductor, and I had auditioned the year before, but they were under contract. And I mean, gutsy 20-some-year-old thinks she can do anything. And lo and behold, new conductor, and they called and gave me the job.
That's awesome.
And the first concert had Daphnis. Talk about trial by fire. I mean, my fingers could probably still do that. I played it so many times. Okay, fast forward, I get a bachelor's and a master's in flute performance and theory, and I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I was teaching adjunct various places, colleges in Wisconsin, and got a job as a liaison between Armstrong Flute Company's publishing house and their new distributor, which was Hanson Publications in Miami. And once I got indoctrinated into the publishing business, I knew that's where I belonged. And so I started with the publishing and then got into writing because my husband at the time, John Edmondson, took a job in Wisconsin with Jensen at the, they were like big deal back then. Wisconsin after Miami, Florida is pretty severe. And I was snowed in all winter and I wrote my first piece.
Okay. Yeah.
And I just kept going. And that
So, what was that first piece that you wrote?
the first piece was variations in theme for solo flute and band
Okay.
because I wanted flute players to have something that made them sound good. And I wanted to get the bands out of D major, which is what the Chaminade's in.
Right.
And bands really shouldn't be playing in D major, not their best key. Um, and it was picked up. Well, Wally Kujala played it all over the country. He was a flute teacher at Northwestern and piccolo player in the Chicago Symphony. John Painter scheduled it on various concerts with the North Shore Band. And the first band piece was a couple years later published by Hal Leonard called Encomium, and it made the Ohio Class C required, my first
Oh,
ever
wow.
band piece. And from then on, it was nobody cared about anything because the music was selling and
Yeah.
everybody wanted a piece of that pie. And that's how I started. I just kept writing.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, with, I guess that was a kind of the transition, and you know, with the um, stuff that you put out through Queenwood, that was really successful with in the band world. There's a ton of stuff out there under that label, and so. But now you've kind of transitioned into another phase of composition. Tell us what you're doing now.
Well, every year we recorded all of the new band music in Los Angeles, and we used studio musicians and could lay down all the band stuff in one day, 2 3 hour sessions. And in 2007, the tuba player whose playing I really enjoyed asked me after the session if I would write a piece for his album. And I went, "What kind of piece?" "Whatever you want." And so I went home and wrote a piece, and it was for quintet. It was flute. Here's my band background: flute, clarinet, trumpet, horn, tuba.
Oh wow. Okay.
and, and it works. It worked really, really well. And then he said, "Well, write some more because we need to fill the album." And next was a trio for clarinet, horn, and tuba. They work really well together.
Yeah.
And the third piece on his album was for double brass quintet, conical versus cylindrical. So it was tuba, three horns, cornet, and the other side was two trumpets, two trombone, bass trombone. And
Okay.
they'd add each other with the trumpets at the top of the V. And
You were talking about the conical versus cylindrical.
right. And it's called Edwin Ox, and it's available on my website. But at that point, and I was still writing band music in 2008, I didn't know all those notes were inside. I just, I didn't have a clue. And
Yeah.
once I found that there was a whole lot more to say, I just went ahead with it. And I was tired. Queenwood was exhausting. We did everything ourselves, from writing the music to unloading the trucks to shipping all over the world to all of the advertising and invoicing and all of that stuff. It was physically very exhausting. When we
Right.
sold, um, I had 10 tons of music and shelving in my garage
Oh wow.
that filled 13 pallets that filled an entire semi. In the warehouse, we filled two semis. And all of that music got lifted there by mostly John Me and some hired help.
Right.
And it was physically difficult, mentally fun. I loved every minute of it. But when I had a chance, I went all digital
Okay.
with this company. You buy it, you print it, everything's done online.
Yeah. That's we're seeing a new trend in that style. A lot of younger composers, especially, are definitely moving towards uh, developing that aspect. And uh, you mentioned a couple of things that I'd love to talk a little bit more about. Uh, you mentioned having those notes in you. You didn't realize those notes were in you. What are some of the what inspires or invokes that voice coming out? What are some of the things that you've experienced?
I I really don't know. It's the same with band music. I would start with an idea, and I knew what level I was going to be writing for, whether it was beginning band or the United States Army band. And so I was facing an empty score,
Right,
and I would have an idea for the band stuff. I I wanted them to sound great. I wanted them to sound better than they really were,
right,
and I wanted to reinforce something they're learning. I have a lot of, if I had $1 for every dollar and quarter eighths in my music, I would be very, very rich. But they don't learn to play that rhythm well. They don't learn to play eighth rest, eighth note. It's always late. It's
right,
late until they're usually in college.
right,
Any rest. any note following a rest is late.
Right.
It's like, here's a given fact.
Right.
So, but with the other stuff, it was just I would hear something, and I would sing around the house and write things down, and once I would get that basic germ, that basic motif, then I just had to play with it, and they went somewhere. It was it wasn't me being great. Um, Speaking of the young composers, I wouldn't make it in today's world. I way too private. I would never be able to, um, I'll use the music, blow my trumpet quite like that. And go every piece, every note is just so wonderful, so wonderful. Bye, bye, bye. Join my consortium. I couldn't do it. So to each his own, I guess. I was lucky that I came up when I did because we were still print music. But these young people are the future of the band
Yeah.
music. I think it's incredible. I heard a fanfare by one of these, I call them youngins because I'm not. Uh, um, and I thought, that is so great. You wrote it for probably one of the few groups in the country that can play it. If you'd taken it down a step or maybe even a third or a fourth, you would expand your market exponentially. And I don't think they're thinking about market.
Right.
But if you want your music, you want to be a great composer, you've got to be played because no one else will, they won't know it unless they hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So market's always, except when I write for tuba and clarinet and flute. I mean, then my market's just down to zero.
But it's I remember, trying to find good repertoire for odd instrumentations in the classroom for the solo and ensemble festivals. I mean, we're always looking for things, and there's not a lot of resources for that type of stuff. And band kids are, they're friends first, but they play all different instruments and they want to go and hang out with their friends at these solo and ensemble things. So, having a tuba, clarinet, and flute trio.
Well, that stuff I publish is much too difficult for
Right.
solo and ensemble. Um, it's more for the college student, the professional, and I never know who's going to play it. It's been an interesting journey. Um, I'll give you the best example. A commission years ago was by two executives in the healthcare field, and one played bass trombone and one played violin. And they used to do like strolling musicians at corporate banquets and stuff. And they wanted a piece they could play. And I went, I'm not so sure you can stroll with this. But so I wrote the piece and I thought it was an odd combination. It was odd to write for. It was kind of fun, but I've sold that piece all over the world.
Really?
So there are apparently a lot of bass trombone players that have violin playing friends, and a guy in the UK actually put it on his album.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I never know where they're going, and when I hear from these people, it's just really cool.
Yeah, that is awesome. So, let's dive into young composers and maybe some advice because you hit on a couple of things. Writing to a market that can get your music played, uh, and then you also wrote or you mentioned writing to uh, the ensemble to sound better than what they are. And
Mhm.
I'd like to start there. Tell us a little bit about how that looked in your music, some of the techniques you may have used.
Um, as a joke, I would give rules, and then they became McGinty rules,
Okay.
which I really liked. And there were even T-shirts made that said McGinty rules. That was so cute. But I did have rules that kids, even at the elementary level, are not going to play the same stuff that string players at the elementary level will do.
Right.
You're not going to get band kids to play, all those repeats and DSs and DCs and all that stuff. Um, but I thought everyone should have a chance to be heard. If I'm playing 18th clarinet chair, um, I want to be heard,
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm going to go join soccer team or something. And there are ways to let them be heard. Give the whole clarinet section like a soli moment.
Right.
Um, give everybody who's not optional something where they feel they're an integral part of everything.
Right.
Um, and it was the time that John Williams, Star Wars, and all that, and Raiders, and all those movies were coming out that had sophisticated wind parts, and they wanted to play things that sounded good.
Right.
Um, One of my early easy pieces for band with Hal Leonard was called Atlantis, and it was basically my version of Mike Post, who was writing LA Law and Hill Street Blues and
Yeah.
shows I can't
Yeah.
remember. But what he basically did would be to put a B flat triad above an E flat bass, gives the illusion of the missing G, the polychord, and kids loved it. It sounded well. That piece is still, I think it's still on the Texas UIL list, and they still love it
Right. Right.
because it makes them sound good.
Yeah.
And all I did was eliminate the third and the bottom polychord, but and it wasn't even my idea. I was stealing it, but um, so they need to be heard. They're sophisticated. They don't want to be bored. I want, and then I got into something that would turn on their imagination, like the Red Balloon.
Right.
Probably the biggest seller. Well,
Sure.
maybe not. Definitely one of my favorites, because you can use so many musical terms but never have to say the words. You don't have to say lift or attack or release because you're talking about a balloon.
Right. Right.
So everything is about the balloon, and you're teaching them phrasing and music and all kinds of things.
That's, yeah.
So, but yeah, market, you can't you can't give little kids notes that they've never seen on the page yet.
Right.
Um, Although I often tried. We had a set of suggested ranges and rhythms and stuff for every grade level up to a point, so that we kept it within reason.
Okay. Yeah. Now, so wow. So with finding the market, and you've had a tremendous success in a variety of idioms of composition, whether it's the educational stuff, the wind band stuff, or the solo and chamber music.
Mhm.
Uh, what are what are some tips that you would give to young composers who may be looking to find ways to get their music played, or to find ways to get their voice out there?
First, they have to write it. Then they have to get it played by anybody. I've had people pay friends. I've had them pay with pizza and beer. Some have paid actual money. Um, but you've got to get it played. You've got to get feedback, and you have to be critical of your own stuff.
Yeah.
And you may really, really love something, and it just doesn't work, and you've got to throw it out. Back in the old day, erasers were very handy. Um, I would hit the delete key as we progressed to the computer age. And I knew that if I saved what didn't work, that I would try to use it somewhere.
Okay.
So I got rid of it
Yeah.
because it didn't work.
Right.
And Yeah, you want to think everything's wonderful, but you know in your heart not everything is wonderful.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to hear that. You have to be able to edit yourself, and you need honest friends who say this doesn't work or this works and why.
Right.
And you have to know all the instruments. You have to know enough theory that you're not going backwards. There
Yeah.
was a march that was submitted to Queenwood where all the chord progressions were wrong. And you don't go, I don't know what they were, but you know what a march is supposed to sound like. And this was all backward.
Okay.
And so you've got to know enough about a lot of things to really make music. And if
Right.
you think everything you do is really, really terrific, then I would say you have a little slight ego problem. Slight.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd love to talk a little bit about, one of the pieces a few years ago with Mid Atlantic Wind Symphony was Victorious, and we talked little bit about it in the pre-show conversation. But you said that there's kind of a cool story behind that, and tell us a little bit about that piece because that one is definitely a higher level wind band piece, and but tell us a little bit about who you wrote it for and how you came about constructing it.
That was my third Army commission. The first one was the United States Army Band in Washington, where I was the first, and I think I'm still the only woman commissioned to write for them. And the second was for the West Point Bicentennial. And the third was for what was then called the Continental Army Band, which is now the Tradoc Band. Um, and he wanted something that would sound good for them. They're professional musicians,
Right.
and that would also be playable by high schools. And I don't remember what was going on in the world at that time, but soldiers, as always, were going here and there, and some were not coming back.
Right.
And there's always that taps aspect to anything. So with every homecoming, there are those that don't come home. So I wanted taps, but I wanted it in the beautiful setting. So I wrote I wrote a tune that I thought taps would go with. I'm old fashioned. I did like putting a puzzle together, and it worked. And then I transposed it up like a fourth or gave it to somebody else. I gave it to the horns or whatever. Um, and that was wonderful. I had most of the ending, but I didn't have a beginning to the piece. And they were premiering at the Ohio Music Educators Association convention. So I knew the audience would be nothing but band directors. And here I am with no opening. And that's one of those times I wrote about 20. I wasn't sure even when I was done that that was the best opening. But so I had thrown out maybe 20. And
Wow.
there's some point you just have to, well, if they're not quite right, why you can't fix it. It's
Yeah.
you gotta throw it out and try something else.
Yeah. That's cool. So tell us a little bit about where we can find your music today.
Well, all the band music, well, not all of it, everything that's not in print, and a lot of things that would be out of print, but publishers have digitally put back in print one way or another, um, are available from your basic educational music resources. What I've been doing since 2008, roughly, is at McGintymusic.com, and it's uh, Christmas music and chamber music for woodwinds and brass,
Okay.
and that one violin player.
Yeah.
And um, when we were recording the tuba album, I got to work a lot with Bill Reichenbach, and Bill is just a legend. He's younger than I am. He's a legend. He's a terrific bass trombone player. He's played and gigged all over the world.
Yeah.
He writes. He's the go-to guy, bass trombone for all of the movies. And most of the people I was dealing with are part of the movie orchestra, and especially the brass players that I dealt with. And uh, he had written a bunch of stuff for the trombone quartet and stuff. And I said, well, how about if I publish it? And he kind of, I have pictures, photographs still in my office of the expression on his face when I suggested all this. It was a company that wasn't even real at that point. And he said yes. And he was the mainstay. He has done 20 some quartets for Christmas where it's not out of the hymnal Christmas tunes. They've got some flavor, they've got some chords, they've got some stylistic things, maybe a hemiola here and there. Just um,
Right.
they're so tasteful. And what I did, I took them all, I made them available for flute, flute choir, clarinet, saxophone, high brass, three trumpets, and trombone or euphonium or whatever,
Yeah.
um, the trombone quartet and bassoon quartet. And so a lot of them are playable by kids, and they'll take them out, high school kids that go to nursing homes and malls and whatnot and play Christmas music. These are perfect. And he'd written a bunch of brass bands for a reenactment, oh, years ago. Um, oh, I don't have my details, but anyway, uh, not of um, not the typical British brass band, uh, really, really hard piece.
Right.
These were familiar, like William Tell and The Girl I Left Behind Me and stuff.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who was working on his DMA at Eastman at the time, they started a brass band and he did video recordings of all this, which are available on YouTube.
Very cool.
And they're feel-good Americana kind of pieces that audience would love to hear that at the very end of any brass band concert.
Yeah.
So it's diverse. And then I have some other composers. I have two of the staff arrangers for the United States Marine Band, although one of the staff arrangers is now the assistant director.
Okay. Yeah.
He went from enlisted to next in line to be in command. Um, and it's like I hear it, and if I like it, if I think it's musically worth my editing time, um, I'll publish it. And if it doesn't find an audience, I I'm stuck. And I'm not out, the
Right.
1,000 pounds of music,
Right.
but I feel bad for the composer, arranger, whatever, because it didn't find its little niche. And there's got to be a niche for that stuff somewhere. But
Right.
so this is not some worldwide marketing campaign. This is newsletters and announcements on Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. So, and tell us, everybody, where we can find your music.
McGintymusic.com. And it's all there you can go from chamber music or by instrument or by Christmas music, um, and read about the composers. And there are albums that feature the music where they have direct links to um, CD Baby or wherever.
Right. Awesome.
So,
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us a little bit, share a little bit about your journey, give us some ideas for the future, and definitely we want to check you out online at mcgintymusic.com. And thank you so much for joining us.
oh, my pleasure.